After the introduction in the beginning of our parsha regarding the situation, the time, the place where Yidden and Moshe was standing at the time of the saying of Mishnah, Torah Chumash Devorim, so the Torah starts giving over what Moshe said to the Yidden. Hashem Elokeinu diber eleinu b'chorev leimoir. Hashem spoke to us in chorev, saying, Rav lochem sheves b'hor hazeh. We're going to discuss what these words mean, Rav lochem sheves b'hor hazeh. So Rashi quotes the words Rav lochem sheves, and he explains that it means kipshutoi. We'll soon see that what this means generally is that you were here at the mountain long enough. Then there's Medrash Agoda, says Rashi, that harbe lochem gedula v'schar, that you get lots of greatness and reward for staying at this mountain. You got lots of greatness and reward. You made the Mishkan, the Menorah, the Kalim, you received the Torah, you appointed Sanhedrin. In Sanhedrin there's the Sari Alaf, the officers over groups of 1,000, over groups of 100. Says the Rebbe, we need to understand. Rashi in his Pirush ala Torah is coming to explain Pshutish al Mikra, the simple meaning of the Pasuk. So why does Rashi not suffice with the explanation just kipshutoi, that the pasuk just Rav lochem means the literal and simple translation, which would be like dai lochem, which would mean that it's enough for you staying at this mountain. It's sufficient how long you stayed by this mountain. Why does Rashi need the Medrash Agoda? So there are Mefarshim that learn that according to the first and simple explanation, the difficulty is because then the Torah should have just simply said, instead of Rav lochem, it should have said Dai lochem, which means it's enough, it's sufficient. But the Rebbe says this is difficult because we find already in Rashi earlier that translated this word Rav elsewhere as meaning Dai, that it's enough. And in that case, Rashi did not bring a second Pirush, which means that the word Rav could be simply just translated as Dai. The Rebbe now moves on to the second Pirush from the Agoda. And in this Pirush, Rashi is explaining to us that the word Rav is for the Ribui, Harbe Lochem, that is that the Yidden got lots of greatness at this mountain. And the Rebbe says it's not understood. Number one, why is it that Rashi is mentioning these different aspects of greatness that are mentioned in the Medrash Agoda, which we'll go through those details again soon? But the question is, according to Rashi in Pshutish al Mikra, he should have brought the greatness that it was accomplished on this mountain. Rashi should have brought the one that is explicitly mentioned in Pshutish al Mikra in the simple words of the pasuk. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk a little later on, Haniyok hadover hagodol hazeh, did something as great as this ever happen? Or hanishma kamayu, was anything like this ever heard? Was there ever a nation that should hear the voice of Hashem speaking to them from the fire? So Rashi doesn't mention this. Rashi just mentions Kabbalah Torah. Kibaltem Torah, you received the Torah. But he doesn't mention this point that they heard the voice of Hashem by Matan Torah, which the pasuk itself refers to this as a dover godol, this voice of Hashem coming, speaking from the fire. Why doesn't Rashi mention that? Now the Rebbe looks at the points that Rashi does mention. And the Rebbe says, seemingly in these things that Rashi mentions, it's not so noticeable the greatness that happened, that was the chidush by this mountain. First of all, as far as Torah is concerned, the fact that the Yidden got Torah and mitzvahs, this is not a completely new thing. Adam Arishain, Avram, and so on, received already various inyanim of Hayrois, of inyanim of Torah. The Bnei Noach were commanded for the 7 mitzvahs. We know that there was the concept of the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. The Yidden had Torah and mitzvahs starting from the times of the Avos. So that's as far as Torah is concerned. So this was not completely new. Also, as far as Sanhedrin, judges, this was also something that was there earlier. Even the Goyim had this, as it's understood, obviously. And certainly the Yidden had it. So there's no such a major chiddush that's happening over here. The Rebbe now looks at some more diyukim within Rashi's second Pirush, the Pirush of the Agoda. The first thing the Rebbe looks at is the order. The order that Rashi mentions, the Mishkan, the Torah, and the Sanhedrin, don't actually go in chronological order of how they actually happened. Because first, of course, there was Kabbalah Torah, they received the Torah. Then there was the appointment of the Sanhedrin, and only afterwards comes the putting up of the Mishkan. Point number 2, when mentioning the Mishkan, Rashi says, Mishkan Menorah v'Kelim. So he's highlighting the Menorah separately from the other Klei HaMishkan. So why is that necessary? Why doesn't Rashi just simply say Mishkan v'Kelev? And automatically that would include the Menorah. Point number 3, says the Rebbe, when speaking about the Sanhedrin, Rashi mentions the Sari Alafim, the officers over 1,000 and over 100, but he does not mention the Sari Chamishim, the officers over 50, and the officers over groups of 10. The Rebbe says these last few questions become even stronger when we look into the Sifri, which seemingly would be the source of Rashi's Pirush, and there, in fact, we find that first of all, in the order, there the Mishkan is mentioned after Kabbalah Torah and the appointment of the Sanhedrin, in the order the way it happened. As far as mentioning the Menorah, in the Sifri it just says Mishkan and Kalim, it does not mention the Menorah separately. And finally, as far as the Sanhedrin, it does mention the Sari Chamishim and Sari Asaris. And yet Rashi changes in all of these 3 details in this part of the Rashi itself, changing it from that which is the source of his Pirush. The Rebbe looks at some more differences now between Rashi and the source of the Sifri, and this is in the earlier part of that same Rashi. So in the Sifri it says that Schar hu lachem, that this was a reward for you staying by this mountain. Rashi mentions another thing. Rashi mentions Gedula v'schar, greatness and reward. Point number 2, in the Sifri it says Schar hu lachem yeshivaschem b'har hazeh, it was a reward for you staying by this mountain. In other words, the staying at the mountain itself is the reward. Rashi says, Har belachem gedula v'schar, there's lots of greatness and reward, al yeshivaschem b'har hazeh, meaning the reward is as a result of staying by this mountain. Not that the staying of the mountain is the reward. As a result of staying in the mountain, you get lots of reward. Finally, the last question that Rebbe has over here in this comparing Rashi to the Sifri, in the Sifri the expression is Manisi Aleichem. That means Hashem appointed the Sanhedrin over you at this mountain, whereas Rashi says Manisim Lachem, you the Yidden appointed the Sanhedrin. So the Rebbe says the explanation of all of this is, simply the word Rav Lachem doesn't only mean Dai Lachem, that it's sufficient, it's enough for you. It means something more than this. Rav Lachem means that it's too much for you. It's more than enough. As Rashi explained in the Pasuk, when Korach and his people are complaining to Moshe and Aaron, and it says, Vayoimru Aleim, they said, Rav Lachem. So Rashi explains it means, Harbe Yoiser Midai. You took much more than you should have. More than enough. You took greatness for yourselves. And this is Rashi's difficult in our Pasuk of Rav Lachem Sheves Bahar Hazeh. To translate Rav Lachem simply, which is Har beyoyser midai, much more than enough, you stayed here long enough by this mountain, is difficult to understand. When Yidden are receiving more and more Torah and mitzvahs, these are things that obviously are necessities and are bringing tremendous benefit to the Yidden. Furthermore, by staying at Har Sinai, this is constantly reminding them the amazing sight that happened when they were standing at Har Sinai receiving the Torah, etc. Furthermore, this mountain is called Har HaElokim. How can it ever be a situation where you could say it's too much to be here? At the very most, it should have said Dai Lochem. Dai Lochem means, okay, you were here enough time. But to say Rav Lochem, which implies more than enough, how can you ever be there more than enough? And this is why Rashi needs to tell us that yes, the meaning is still Kipshutoi. That nevertheless, even though there is this difficulty over here, it still means Kipshutoi, that it was too much. Because based on the content and the context of what the Pasuk is trying to tell us, as we'll soon see, in fact, the point is that yes, you are here too much, too long. As we'll soon see why that is. But before that, says the Rebbe, we're first going to have a look at a more general diuk of what's going on in our psukim. And that is, that everything that's being discussed in these 3 psukim, where Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Yidden that there was this special message from Hashem, that Hashem specially spoke and said, that you here too long by this mountain, and now turn and travel to the land that I'm giving you. Look, I've given this land to the Avos, and there are children after them, etc., etc. So there was this whole thing that Hashem said. Says the Rebbe, all of this, Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that this all happened, but that it happened earlier on. And this, where should have it been mentioned? This is in Chumash Bamidbar, which is the main place where the Torah actually describes the Yidden traveling away from Har Sinai. And there, this whole thing is not mentioned, that Hashem gave this specific instruction to move on. All the Pasuk says over there is, Vayihi b'shana hashenis, on the 2nd year, the 2nd month, the 20th day of the month, so it's Chof Iyar, on the second year, the cloud raised itself up from over the Mishkan, and the Yidden traveled now from Midbar Sinai. So there's no mention over there that Hashem gave a special message to move. Why is it important to be said over here? The reason for it, says the Rebbe, is understood. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to describe to the Yidden everything that took place, starting from what happened at the time of Matan Torah until the situation as they are in the state that they are in right now in Ever HaYarden. What Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to emphasize and to highlight is that really Yidden were supposed to go into Eretz Yisrael right after Har Sinai. And it's only because of the Chet HaMeraglim that they were delayed in the Midbar for such a long time. And this is why Moshe Rabbeinu has to tell them that already right there, when Yidden were B'chorev at Har Sinai, Hashem told them you should immediately go to Eretz Yisrael. Now we can understand the meaning of Rav Lochem Sheves Boher Azeh, that you're here too long. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to emphasize the extent of how much Hashem wanted to rush them to go in immediately into Eretz Yisrael, to quote Rashi in this parsha. The Shechina was, so to speak, struggling or working so hard to make sure that you come quickly into Eretz Yisrael, to the extent this mattered so much to Hashem that notwithstanding all of the amazing things that come along with staying at Har Sinai, nevertheless staying there and not going into Eretz Yisrael is considered too much, too long, because you should be already on your way into Eretz Yisrael. So that's the first part of the Rashi, Kipshutoi, that it means too long. However, says the Rebbe, this Pirush is not completely smooth, it's not completely simple. Because from the words Rav Lochem Sheves, to say that you're there too long, too much, sounds like staying by the mountain was not according to the Ratzon of Hashem, where in fact, the whole time that they're staying by the mountain, just like any of the times that they didn't camp anywhere, was obviously according to the Tzivui of Hashem. It was all based on what Hashem wanted. As long as the cloud didn't move, as long as Hashem is not telling them to move away from staying at the mountain, then it's considered Al Pi Hashem. They're fulfilling right now what Hashem wants to stay by the mountain. So how can you possibly say that Rav Lochem means you stay there too long? How can it be too long? Hashem wanted them to be there. And this is why Rashi brings now the second Pirush from the Medrash Haggadah, that Rav Lochem does not mean the simple meaning that you're here too long, but it means something else completely. Rav Lochem is from the word harbe, that you had lots of gedula v'schar. Rav from the word of ribui, that means there's lots of greatness and reward. And as Rashi is going to go on to explain what those things are. But, says the Rebbe, in order for Rashi to explain that even according to this Pirush, the message to the Yidden in Rav Lochem Sheves Boer Hazeh, even if it's going to mean something else, the point is still the same general point, that it's trying to tell them how much the idea was to rush, to move on, to travel, to go quickly into Eretz Yisrael. Because as we said, that's the whole point of why these psukim are even being mentioned, that Hashem told them to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's because this is what Rashi is trying to highlight. This is why he does not quote the Sifri exactly as we were quoting and comparing before. But rather, Rashi says, Medrash Haggadah. In other words, he's not quoting the Sifri exactly, he's quoting something else, where the expression is, as we quoted from Rashi, Asisa Mishkan Menoira V'Kelim Kibaltem Toirim and Isim Lochem Sanhedrin, because it's specifically these things that Rashi does mention, different to the Sifri. And it's specifically in this order that's going to show how the Yidden were already so ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, as we'll soon discuss, why these things specifically. And that's why the Pasuk is again going to bring out that you had all of these things. That means you're mamish ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore you should be moving on quickly to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe explains what the things that Rashi does mention, how this all shows how the Yidden are ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. Before the Yidden go into their own land, in an Eretz Noishevis, in a settled land, a place where the order to say that Hachayim is going to be, as one lives in a regular land, seemingly the same as other nations, and in order to make sure that Chas v'Shalom it shouldn't be, that the Yidden should forget about their uniqueness, the way they're different to other nations, they first need to fortify themselves, they first need to strengthen themselves in the area of what Yidden are. V'atem tiyem li mamleches koinim, you're my a kingdom of priests, v'goy kodesh, and a holy nation. In other words, this needs to become something permanent inside of them, something very, very strong inside of them, that even when later they're going to be in this Eretz Neisheves, they should always remain a Goy Kodesh, a holy nation, Segula Mikol Ha'amim, a treasured nation from amongst all the nations. And this is why the staying at Har Sinai accomplished that the Yidden become a this Goy Kodesh in an absolute, complete way. And in this, generally, there's 3 points that were achieved, 3 points that were accomplished to make sure that this happens. The Rebbe explains, number one, the most important nekuda that happens by the Goy Kodesh, as the pasuk says, K'doshim tiyu ki kodesh ani, you should be holy, because I am holy. You need to be a holy nation, because I am holy, because Hashem is holy. So the number one thing is, V'shachanti b'soichem, Hashem is dwelling amongst the Yidden. And that's the first thing that Rashi mentions. Asisa Mishkan, you made a Mishkan, you're making a permanent place where Hashem's Kedusha is going to be able to rest. And the Rebbe explains it's not sufficient the Gilui Elikus that was by Matan Torah, which we asked before, why doesn't Rashi mention that? The voice of Hashem that came from the fire. Because that was a temporary thing, and that wasn't the V'shachanti b'soichem b'kviz, that's not Hashem coming and dwelling amongst the Yidden in a permanent way. And we need something that's going to remain with the Yidden in a permanent way, so that's why the first thing that's mentioned is the Mishkan. Says the Rebbe, since the emphasis is about what the Hashiras Hashchina is affecting by the Yidden, also as they are going to be in the Eretz Neisheves, in the settled land, therefore Rashi specifically mentions the menorah from amongst all the Klei HaMishkan, because the menorah, as Rashi had told us already previously, was considered Eidus L'chol Boi Olam. This was the testimony to all the people of the world, Sha'ashchina Shoyre B'Yisrael, that the Shechina is dwelling amongst the Yidden. As discussed specifically, the Rebbe doesn't go into it, about the different miracles of the menorah and the light of the menorah, etc., and how it burnt, etc. So that's number one, the Mishkan. Then comes Kibaltem Torah, receive the Torah, that because the Yidden are unique as a Goy Kodesh through the Asherah Hashchina in the Mishkan, but this now also has an impact and influence and changes the conduct of the Yidden, that they should be Kodesh, to be separated from everything and everyone in the way they are, in every single place and in their daily life. And how does that happen? Through Kibaltem HaTorah, when they're receiving the Torah and Hayrah from the Eibishter of how they should be acting, of how they should be. So that's point number two. And finally, in order for Yidden to know and to understand precisely what are the Hayrahs HaTorah, so now we need the third thing, Minui HaSanhedrin, the appointment of the Sanhedrin, which they are going to teach the Yidden, the Dinim, the Inyanim of the Torah, to show them how they should carry out the instructions of the Torah B'Poil. Says the Rebbe, now we're also going to understand why Rashi only mentions the Sorei Alofim and the Sorei Meis, not like the Sefri, which mentions what the Pasuk also speaks about, Sorei Chamishim and Sorei Asoris. And this is going to be again related to the idea because it's all about when they come into Eretz Yisrael, how they're going to be behaving. The Rebbe says, the fact that the Sorei Chamishim and the Sorei Asoris were appointed, this was something only for the duration of the time that the Yidden were in the Midbar. When they were traveling in the Midbar with all of the various different bothers of the Midbar and moving in the Midbar, so therefore you need these officers even on smaller groups. But once Yidden come into Eretz Yisrael, into the settled land, in a permanent place, there's no necessity anymore for the Sorei Chamishim and certainly not for the Sorei Asoris, and that's why Rashi doesn't mention it. Says the Rebbe, since Rashi is only mentioning the things that are necessary for being ready to live in Eretz Yisrael as a Goy Kadosh, this is why Rashi does mention the Sorei Alofim and Sorei Meis, which will always be necessary. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we're also going to understand the difference for the reason for the other differences between Rashi and the Sifri. Says the Rebbe, according to Rashi, the point of our pasuk, Rav Lochem, was to hint not only to rewards that Yidden are getting at this mountain, but rather the main focus and the main point is what the staying at the mountain is achieving by the Yidden, that they are becoming ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. That's the main point. And therefore Rashi doesn't just mention reward, schar, but he also mentions, as we said before, that there was lots of gedula, because the main point of here is the greatness that Yidden are achieving, Yidden are gaining by staying at the mountain. And since this gedula is not the staying at the mountain itself, but rather as a result of being by the mountain, all of these great things happen to them. This is why Rashi says, not that it was the schar is that you're staying by the mountain, But rather he's saying, Schar al yeshivaschem, the reward for staying at the mountain. The Rebbe says that actually the two expressions that Rashi uses, Gedula and Schar, are connected with 2 points of going into Eretz Yisrael, which the continuation of the Psukim speak about actually. There's number one, the actual coming into Eretz Yisrael. To come into Eretz Yisrael, that's the idea of the Gedula that we just spoke about, all these great things that the Yidden gained. To be able to be the Mamleches Koyanim and Goy Kaddish, as we just mentioned. And number two, there's the way they're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. The Pasuk says, Boyu or Rishu, you're going to come in and take over the land. And as Rashi explains, that when they're going to come, if they were going to come into the land in that particular way, they wouldn't have even needed any weapons, any war. No one would protest. And this is a reward for the Yidden, that the Yidden are getting because of what they had achieved at the time of staying at the mountain. The same thing says the Rebbe in regards to appointing the Sanhedrin, in which there was definitely 2 things happened. There was a command of the Eibishter, and the fact that the Yidden appointed it. So there's the tzivui, as the Pasuk says, V'tzivcho Elokim. This is when Yisro is telling Moshe to appoint him if Hashem says so. So there was what Hashem commanded, and then there's as Moshe Rabbeinu actually appoints the officers, and he says Havulachem, provide people to be the officers, etc., etc. Says the Rebbe in Sifri, where the point is about the reward that's being given from the Eibishter. So therefore it says that there was so much great things that happened to the Yidden, so much reward that the Yidden got. So it says Monisi Aleichem, that Hashem appointed it. But where Rashi is coming to emphasize more about the Gedul of the Yidden themselves, in other words, the greatness that the Yidden are achieving, what they're going to benefit from being here, as their preparation and going to Eretz Yisrael. So it's about their greatness, and therefore Rashi says, Menisam alet lochem, you appointed for yourself the Sanhedrin. Now the Rebbe turns to the Yena Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, the Chassidus or the Hayrois in Pirush Rashi. Says the Rebbe a few things. Number one, Rashi quotes from the Pasuk only the words Rav Lochem Sheves. He doesn't even mention the word Bahor Hazeh. He says it's enough you being in one place, or too much being in one place. As Rashi says, Kipshutai, it means simply. Only later in the Medrash Haggadah does he quote again the words Bahor Hazeh as well. Says that Rebbe Rashi is telling us a very general Hoyroi in Avodas Hashem. A Yid needs to know that the idea of Shevis, of remaining in one place, just staying in one level in a person's avodah to Hashem and not moving on, going higher, is Rav Lochem. As Rashi says, Kipshute, that means that's too much, too long. You shouldn't be sticking around too long in one place. No matter how high a Yid's place in his avodah is, but to remain there in one place, in one level, to spend too much time there, that's considered too much. A Yid needs to be a mahalach. A Yid needs to always be on the move, constantly striving to go and to move higher and higher, as the concept of Mailin B'Kodesh. Now says the Rebbe another hoyrah that we could take out of this Rashi. As discussed a number of times, all of the Pirushim in the same Pasuk are always connected to each other, especially in our case, where Rashi is bringing these 2 Pirushim together in one Rashi. So it's definitely these 2 Pirushim are connected to each other. Says the Rebbe, here is the Hoyrah. The 2 ideas that we're saying about going into Eretz Yisrael. First of all, the simple meaning, that Yidden need to go as quickly as possible to go and conquer, take over Eretz Yisrael in the simple sense. Number 2, the Pirush that's telling us that it's more about a Hachana Ruchnis, of the Yidden being spiritually prepared for going into Eretz Yisrael. They made a Mishkan, received the Torah, appointed the Sanhedrin. These 2 ideas are completely dependent on each other. In other words, it's only because we are a Goy Kadosh, we have all of this greatness and reward, that is why we're getting Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe says this is very different to the other nations that become a nation, that becoming a nation is connected with with having a land where they're going to live, etc. Says the Rebbe, by the Yidden it's the other way around. Is the Yidden are a holy nation and that's why they're getting the land. And by the Yidden, the idea of Rav Lochem Sheves, which we translated Kipshutai, the idea of going quickly into the land, is not only about a swiftness or a quickness in time, but it's more importantly, it's the mehirus, the quickness that it is also in the way they're going to come into Eretz Yisrael. And that's as a result of the Ribui Gedula, because of the greatness that the Yidden have and that they are. So that's why also the way they're going to come into Eretz Yisrael is going to be in a quick way, in the sense that ein ma'arer b'davar, that no one's going to protest. There won't be any war. There won't be any weapons. In other words, the connection of Eretz Yisrael to Yidden is very, very different to the way it's by other nations. By the other nations, so their land doesn't have an essential bond and connection with them, and therefore they have to wage a war to be able to receive the land. Whereas by Yidden, the connection of the Yidden to Eretz Yisrael is in a way that the land be'etzem belongs to them. And when the Yidden are in a state of Goy Kodesh in a revealed way, in a holy way, in an open and revealed way, then this is also comes out and is revealed in a clear way, that the land clearly belongs to them essentially. And as the Tanchuma says, that Hashem chose Eretz Yisrael and He chose as His portion the Yidden. And the Eibishter says, let the Yidden, who are my portion, come into my portion in Eretz Yisrael, let them inherit Eretz Yisrael. And says the Rebbe, how did the Yidden get Eretz Yisrael? Through a bris, through a covenant that can never be cancelled. And therefore, ein ma'arer b'davar, no one could come and protest against it. Ve'enchem tzrichim l'milchama, and you don't have to fight for it. Says the Rebbe, v'chein tiyeh lanu b'karev mamish, that will be zoicha to receive Eretz Yisrael and to complete Eretz Yisrael in a way that no one protests the matter and that there's no need for any war, and all of this, b'mehei rav yameinu mamish.